My fiancée modified the prenup to steal my $10 million business, but her sister showed me the laptop with the entire plan, and now he's facing 5 years in prison. I'm 34 years old. I own a chain of organic food stores, 12 locations across 3 states, and 6 months ago, I almost lost everything by trusting the wrong person. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Catherine like 2.5 years ago at a sustainable business conference in Portland. She worked in social media marketing for fashion brands. She was smart, funny, and seemed to understand my vision about the organic business. You know, she didn't just see dollars but actually cared about environmental impact and all that. We fell in love pretty fast, honestly, and by the next year, we were already talking about getting married. The thing is, I built this business from scratch over 10 years. I started with one small store in a middle-class neighborhood when I was 24, working like 80 hours a week, sleeping in the stockroom, the first few months because I couldn't afford rent and a storefront at the same time. Every new store was a fight. Every expansion meant years of intent, planning, and calculated risk. So when Catherine and I started talking about marriage, my lawyer told me, "Look, Patrick, you have to protect what you built." And I completely agreed. It wasn't distrust toward Catherine specifically. It was just common sense when you have a business of this magnitude. When I brought up the prenup topic, Catherine understood it perfectly, or at least that's what I thought. She told me, "It makes sense. It's your life's work. I didn't build that with you. It would be unfair for me to claim I had a right to half if things don't work out." I was even surprised by how mature she was about it, because I've heard stories of couples who fight horribly over these issues. We spent like 3 weeks with lawyers drafting something fair. She would have reasonable financial protection, a fixed amount that increased with years of marriage, but the business stayed completely out of the equation. We signed a preliminary version, and everything seemed perfect. That was like 8 months ago. 3 months after that conversation, her brother Douglas came back to town. And that's where everything started falling apart, though I didn't see it coming at all. Douglas was 37, 3 failed marriages behind him, and a history of businesses that also failed, like he tried to open a bar that closed in 6 months, then a tech company that never took off, things like that. But Catherine adored him. He was her older brother. And when he came back after living, I don't know where, for 2 years, she was super happy to have him around again. At first, Douglas seemed like a normal guy, maybe a bit intense, always asking questions about my business, how the supply chain worked, who our main suppliers were, what margins we handled. I thought he was just interested, trying to make conversation, because, well, what else were we going to talk about? But after a month of having him at my house for dinner every weekend, I started noticing that Catherine was also asking more questions than normal. Specific things about the corporate structure. If I was the sole owner or had partners, how much each store was worth individually, what the expansion plans were for the next 5 years, and her behavior changed in general. Catherine had always been financially independent, earned well with her marketing clients, but suddenly she started spending like never before. One week, she showed up with a purse that cost like $8,000, then she wanted to remodel her entire home office, even though we'd just done it 6 months earlier. Then she told me she needed a new car, even though her 2021 BMW was pristine. I gave her a credit card linked to my account for emergencies, something I do with people I trust in my life, and she started using it for everything. It wasn't that I minded spending money on her, but it was the sudden change that puzzled me. She also started pushing to have a role in the business. She'd tell me, "I could handle all your social media marketing, expand, your online presence," and I'd explain that we already had a team for that it worked well, but she'd insist saying she could do it better, that she understood the brand better than anyone because she knew me. She wanted an office at headquarters, wanted to attend strategy meetings, wanted to know all the numbers. And I, idiot that I was, thought it was just enthusiasm about being part of my life, that she wanted to get more involved before we got married. Like 2 more months went by like that, with her and Douglas basically interrogating me about every aspect of the business at every family dinner, and then my lawyer called me to review the final version of the prenup before officially signing it. He sent me the document by email on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing inventory, and I decided to read it completely, even though we'd already discussed it before. And there, on page 12 of 47 pages, I found something we definitely hadn't agreed on. The document now said that Catherine would have rights to half the company, not just a fixed compensation, half of everything. The 12 stores, supplier contracts, expansion plans, everything. And not just that, there was a clause giving her rights over any future business growth during the marriage. Basically meant that if I opened more stores while married, she'd automatically own 50%. I read that part like 5 times because I couldn't believe it. I called my lawyer immediately and told him, "This isn't what we agreed on, it has to be a mistake." And he told me no, that the document had been modified by Catherine's lawyer 2 weeks ago, and he assumed I'd accepted the changes. I felt like someone had thrown ice water on me. Throughout our entire relationship, Catherine had been honest, straightforward, had never lied about anything, and suddenly she was trying to steal 10 years of work without even telling me. That night I got home. She was cooking pasta, singing some song, acting completely normal. And I told her, "We need to talk about the prenup." Her face changed immediately, like that second when someone knows they've been caught but tries to play it off. She told me, "Oh yeah, my lawyer made some suggestions. They're just standard protections. All modern prenups include those clauses." I told her, "Catherine, these aren't standard protections. This is literally giving you half my business." And she gave me this whole story about how if we were going to be a team, then she deserved to be part of the business. That her emotional contribution and support were worth as much as my work. That I was selfish if I didn't see it that way. We argued until 3 in the morning. I told her that if she wanted to work in the business, we could talk about a fair salary, a real role with responsibilities, but that giving away half of something I built before meeting her made no sense. She insisted that if I really loved her, I should trust her with this. In the end, she told me she'd think about it and we'd talk calmly later. But I already knew something was very wrong. The following week, I had an important meeting with potential investors for expansion into a 4th state. A meeting I'd been planning for months. We were in the conference room at my main office, like 8 people, including my assistant Gloria and 2 of my most successful store managers, when Catherine showed up unannounced. She just walked in, sat down, and when someone asked who she was, she said, "I'm Patrick's future partner in this business, and I think I should be in all these discussions." I froze. The investors looked at each other uncomfortably, clearly wondering what the hell was happening, and I had to ask Catherine to leave, which she did, but yelling at me that I was a control freak who didn't know how to work as a team. That scene cost me the entire meeting. The investors later called me saying there was too much instability in my personal situation and they preferred to wait. I mean, Catherine literally sabotaged months of work in 10 minutes. And when I confronted her that night, she said she'd talked to Douglas and that he explained to her that I was treating her like she was inferior, that in modern couples everything is shared, that she had a right to be involved in my business decisions. And that's when I started seeing the pattern, you know? Every weird thing Catherine had done in the last 3 months coincided with conversations she'd had with Douglas. The excessive spending, the questions about the business, the prenup modification, everything had her manipulative brother's stamp on it. But the worst was still to come. Douglas started turning Catherine's entire family against me. He told them I was a miser who didn't want to share anything with his sister, that I was using her for public image while keeping her financially dependent. Pure lies, but he sold them well. Catherine's parents, who used to adore me, suddenly started treating me coldly, making comments about how money changes people, how I needed to remember what really mattered in life. That kind of thing. Her sister Morgan still talked to me normally, but she was the only one. I decided to do something probably unethical, but necessary. I invited Douglas for coffee, just the 2 of us, and told him I wanted his advice on investments because he had business experience. I had my phone recording in my pocket, which is legal in my state as long as one party knows they're recording, and Douglas, that arrogant idiot, completely let loose. He told me that if I was smart, I'd give him an executive position in the company, that he could protect my interests better than anyone, that he knew people who could grow the business to double in 2 years. He basically admitted that his whole plan was to marry Catherine off to me so he could get access to the business. I asked him, "And does Catherine know that's your plan?" And he laughed and said, "My sister does what I tell her to do. She always has." That destroyed me, honestly. Not just because it confirmed the manipulation, but because it meant the woman I loved was so easily influenced that her brother could completely control her. I wondered if anything between us had been real, or if Douglas had orchestrated everything from the beginning. 2 weeks later, Gloria called me on a Sunday at 11 at night saying the office security cameras detected movement. I checked the cameras from my phone and saw Douglas in my office, literally going through files, taking pictures of documents with his cell phone. I called building security and they removed him, but the damage was done. We later discovered that Catherine had given him a copy of her keys, which she had because she sometimes worked from my office, and that she'd also been sending him confidential documents by email for weeks. Complete financial reports, supplier lists with negotiated prices, exclusive contracts, everything. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The following Monday, I sent Catherine a formal email, copying my lawyer and hers, canceling the wedding and explaining exactly why. I attached the recording of my conversation with Douglas, the security camera images, the email records where she sent confidential information, and a comparison of the original prenup versus the modified one. I gave her 30 days to get her stuff out of my house and cut off all contact. Catherine exploded. She called me like 50 times that day, sent me messages saying it was all a misunderstanding, that Douglas had confused her but that she really loved me, that we could fix it. I didn't answer any calls. But what she did next was incredible even for her. She grabbed that emergency credit card I'd given her and in 3 days spent $122,000. $122,000 in 3 days. Buying everything. Jewelry, designer clothes, expensive furniture, even a trip to Paris she didn't even take. Just bought it for revenge, I guess. When my bank alerted me about the excessive spending, I called Catherine directly and told her, "I'm canceling the card right now while I'm talking to you," and she screamed that it was her money anyway, that I owed it to her for everything she'd suffered, that I was leaving her on the street with nothing. I reminded her that she had her own job, her own income, her own apartment she'd kept this whole time, but according to her, I'd ruined her life. Catherine's sister, Morgan, was the one who finally revealed the whole truth. She called me like 2 weeks after canceling the wedding and told me we needed to talk in person. We met at a Starbucks and she pulled out a laptop, Douglas's laptop that she'd taken from her parents' house. On that computer there was an Excel file with the entire plan, and when I say entire, I mean entire. Douglas had been planning this for months, even before returning to town. He had a timeline with specific dates, notes on how to manipulate Catherine, drafts of the prenup modifications, even the name of a fake lawyer who was supposedly going to help him legitimize the fraudulent documents. There were spreadsheets calculating how much money they could get if I sold the business after marriage, projections of how much it would be worth in 5 years, plans for how Douglas could force me out of my own company once Catherine owned 50%. Morgan had tears in her eyes while showing me all this, telling me she never thought her brother could be so evil, that she always knew Douglas was problematic, but that this was another level completely. I thanked Morgan and told her I was going to have to use that evidence legally, and she said she understood, that in fact, that's why she was showing it to me. Turns out, Douglas had also manipulated their parents by making them believe that if Catherine married me, they would also benefit financially, that I'd buy them a new house, pay off all their debts, promises I never made, but that Douglas invented. With all that evidence, my lawyer filed a lawsuit against Douglas for attempted corporate fraud and against Catherine as an accomplice. Though technically, she could argue she was manipulated. Catherine finally understood the magnitude of what her brother had done, or at least that's what she said. She sent me a long, handwritten letter asking for forgiveness, explaining that Douglas had always controlled her since she was a child, that she never had real intention to rob me, that she just wanted to please him because he told her that if she didn't secure me, then I would eventually leave her with nothing. The letter was sincere, I guess. Or sounded sincere, at least. It said she'd been in therapy, that she finally saw how Douglas had used her, that if I gave her a chance, she'd prove she'd changed. It ended saying she still loved me, that she regretted everything, that she'd do anything to fix it. I read that letter like 10 times, and each time I felt worse, not better. Because even if everything she said was true, Even if she really had been manipulated, the fact is she chose to listen to Douglas over me at every critical point. When she had to choose between her brother and protecting my 10 years of work, she chose her brother. I responded with a short email telling her I appreciated her apology, but couldn't be with someone who so easily betrayed me, regardless of the reasons. I told her I hoped her therapy would help her, but that I needed to move on with my life. She didn't take that well. She hired a new lawyer who tried to sue me for emotional damages, arguing that I had seduced her with promises of wealth and then abandoned her when she required reasonable financial security. The lawsuit was ridiculous and was dismissed in 3 weeks, but it still cost me like $40,000 in legal fees anyway. Douglas ended up facing charges for corporate espionage because not only had he stolen information from me, turns out he'd been selling data from my suppliers to competitors, thinking he could make quick money, while planning his long-term scheme. The district attorney was very interested in that case because it affected multiple businesses, not just mine. Last I heard about him, he was facing like 5 years of potential prison time and had lost contact with his entire family except Catherine, who still defended him, saying society didn't understand his business genius or something like that. Catherine's parents eventually called me to apologize, admitting that Douglas had deceived them too, that they never wanted things to end like this. I thanked them but told them I preferred not to stay in contact, that I needed a clean break from everything related to that family. It was hard because I genuinely had liked them, but every time I talked to them, I remembered the whole situation and couldn't handle it emotionally. Now, 6 months later, I've updated all the business security protocols, changed the locks on everything, implemented new monitoring systems for confidential documents, and basically learned an expensive lesson about trusting too quickly. The business is fine. In fact, we just opened store number 13 Inches, Nevada 2 weeks ago. But I'm different. More careful, more distrustful, less willing to let people into my personal life. I don't know if that's good or bad in the long run. Catherine sent me a message on my birthday 2 months ago. It just said, "Happy birthday, Patrick. I hope you're happy," and I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to respond. Tell her I wished her well too. But another part knew that any contact would open a door I need to keep closed. I blocked her after that message, not out of anger but out of necessity to move forward. Last week, I was reviewing financial statements with Gloria, and she asked me if I ever thought about trying to have a serious relationship again, and I told her the truth, that I didn't know. That part of me still can't believe the person I planned to spend my life with was basically preparing an elaborate heist, coordinated with her sociopathic brother. But I guess eventually I'm going to have to try again, because the alternative is staying alone forever, and that doesn't sound ideal either, right? For now, I'm focused on the business, on expanding to more states, on creating something no one can take from me no matter how hard they try to manipulate me. And if that means I'm more cautious in love, well, I'd rather be cautious than be in jail or bankrupt for trusting the wrong person again.